Hey, what is going on, class? Welcome to another lesson. Today we're going to be talking about the quadratic formula. Now, the quadratic formula is a way of solving any quadratic. So we're kind of stepping outside of particular problems. A lot of times, what you've done so far is you take a particular problem and you have to decide, is this something that I can factor or is this something that I have to graph? Well, the quadratic formula allows you to go, I don't care what it is, it's a quadratic in standard form. I can do it. So, some things that you need. First things first, you must have a quadratic in standard form. So that means that you have to have something like y equals ax squared plus bx plus c. Now keep in mind, the a, b, and c values, well really, the b and c values can both be 0. So b or c can equal 0. That's allowed. A cannot equal 0 because then you don't have the x squared term, which is what fundamentally makes this a quadratic, is that squared term. So b or c can be 0. That's totally fine. A, b, and c can be any values. A just cannot be 0. So that's the first thing you need. The second thing you need is this quadratic must equal 0. Or in other words, y must equal 0. So you have to have 0 equals ax squared plus bx plus c. Now what we're technically doing is this thing. I'm going to do it in pink because we're not going to cover it and I'm not going to really go too in depth, but I'm just going to kind of tease you with it. What we're doing to this thing is we're plugging this into this process of solving a quadratic called completing the square. So completing the square is a way of solving a particular quadratic. So if you were given a quadratic, you could complete the square, and if you go all the way through, completing the square gives you the vertex form. So it takes this thing and it makes it be 0 equals ax minus h squared plus k. And somewhere along the way, through this process, you end up getting the roots of this thing, which is really useful. And if we had more time and if I had an extra week and a half, 2 weeks, we would do completing the square, because if you can complete the square, you really actually get to understand where the quadratic formula comes from. I might even just do a bonus video of, hey, this is completing the square, and this is how it relates to the quadratic formula. Let me know if you're interested in that at all. That might help you. But these are the things we need. We need quadratics set up like this. So let's go ahead and let's write down the quadratic formula. Now, I'm going to tell you right now, you have, and by half I mean absolutely have, to memorize this. You should know this by heart. You should, when I say what is the quadratic formula, it should just flow off of your tongue instantly. The quadratic formula. Quadratic formula is x equals the opposite of b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac divided by 2a. Memorize it. You have to know it. There's zero excuse for not knowing it. This little symbol here, some of you might be confused, this little plus or minus. It is a plus sign with a bottom on it of a subtraction sign. And what this means is that at some point later on, we are going to add and subtract. So we're going to have, basically, this thing's going to split off into being two different things. It's going to be the opposite of b plus the square root of b squared minus 4ac divided by 2a. And it's the opposite of b minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac over 2a. It is both of these things. Notice we're talking about the solutions to a quadratic. On your yellow homework, you had questions where you had x equals this and x equals that. It's the same thing. That's what we're getting here. This gives you solutions to quadratics. That's the goal of this thing. So let's put this to work. Let's use this on an example. So ZB is German for zum Beispiel, or for example. If we have 0 equals 3x squared plus 6x plus 3. If we have this thing, we have the things we need. This is an ax squared plus bx plus c mode, and it equals 0. So we're going to take these values, and my advice to you is every time I would write out what I'm going to write in, let's see, I'll do it in pink. A equals 3, B equals 6, C equals 3. And then every time, write the quadratic formula for a few reasons. First off, the more times you write it, the more it's going to be stuck in your head and the better you're going to memorize this. Secondly, if you write this and maybe you make a mistake, maybe you come in here and you write it and you forget the negative b, but you do the entire problem perfectly except for you didn't make that first value negative. If you showed me that, hey, this is what I was working off of, this is what in my head it was, I made a slight mistake here at the conceptual level, but I executed plugging things in and everything else perfectly. If you show that, I'm going to give you more points and partial credit than if you don't show me this at all and you make that same mistake, because you're showing me that you know what you're doing, that you can do the process, but you made a little mistake at the beginning. And that's life. There are plenty of times where you're going to do something where you made a little mistake at the beginning, but you did everything else perfect along the way. And you deserve credit for that, because following the process and doing things correctly is good, even if you made a slight error. So now I'll switch back to purple here. That's what you should write every single time, filling it in for the particular question that you're working on. So plug in your values. So I get the opposite of 6, so negative 6, plus or minus the square root of 6 squared minus 4 times 3 times 3. And I'm just pulling these values from up here. And that's all divided by 2 times 3. So then you're just going to come in here and start simplifying. So negative 6 plus or minus the square root of 36 minus 36. See why I've been harping on you to know your multiplication tables, to know your squares, because all of those things are super, super important, and they make this whole process a lot easier. So then, bring it up here. I have the opposite of 6 plus or minus the square root of 36 minus 36 is 0 divided by 6. Notice how slowly I'm taking this. I'm not trying to rush it. I'm just going nice and slow. So the square root of 0 is what? Hopefully you're instinctually going, it's 0. So I have negative 6 kind of over here in our heads. We can think this is negative 6 plus 0 and negative 6 minus 0. In this case, it's kind of nice because plus 0 minus 0, it's the same thing. It's still negative 6. So negative 6 divided by 6 is just x equals negative 1. So that's the whole process. I'm going to go ahead and leave you here in this video just because it's getting a little long and office hours are coming up. So I'm going to leave you here with this. Try this out. There'll be another video coming where I look at two more examples and kind of talk more about what we do with this. But I just want to leave you with this right now. Let me know if you have any questions, and I look forward to seeing you in office hours, hopefully.